The fantasy playoffs are here. This is the most important time of the year, so if you have any questions or just want a second opinion, drop a comment down below. I'll answer you as quickly as I possibly can. Again, this is the time that matters most. But if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, as we're on the road to 10K. We can't get there without you. Starting off here with a quick little recap from last week. On the left side of your screen, you're going to see a list of names we talked about in last week's video. On the right side, if you see green, of course that's good. Yellow in the middle, red is wrong. And for Geno Smith there, he didn't even compete in the game. So there's an exception to the rule. So 7 right, 2 in the middle, 2 wrong, if we're keeping track, right? But then let's start off with the quarterback position here with Matthew Stafford. As you see in the top right, over the last 3 weeks or so, he's been playing like a Detroit Lion. But last week, Matthew Stafford proved me wrong. He had 294 yards, 3 touchdowns against a tough Baltimore Ravens defense. And I'm here to correct that mistake. I'm going to start him this week against the Washington Commanders. He plays a Commanders defense this week that has the league's worst pass defense. And on top of that, they gave up 45 points in back-to-back games right before their bye week. This Rams team is in the hunt for the playoffs, and they need wins now more than ever, at least for this season. So given the wins, the great matchup, and the fact that Cooper Kupp's also back apparently, I'm going to start Matthew Stafford this weekend, of course, unless you have an elite option. But then how about Jordan Love? Jordan Love, I'm going to start him as well, as he's coming off of a down week, no doubt about it. However, he's still been dominant over this last month of football. Aside from last week, where he had 10 points against the Giants, the 3 weeks prior, Jordan Love was averaging 24 fantasy points a game. That is top 3 status, right? I'm not sure if Christian Watson's going to be playing this weekend, but I do think in this very interesting matchup against the Buccaneers, where both teams need a win to keep their playoff hopes and lives alive, no pun intended, I'd roll the dice with Jordan Love and hope that last week was truly an anomaly going forward. Again, no pun intended. But then how about Tua Tagovailoa? This is a guy that you think surefire start. He's gotten me to the fantasy playoffs with Tyreek. You gotta start him. Well, you know, we've been telling you guys for weeks the Dolphins have a really tough playoff schedule. So unless Tyreek and Waddle can go crazy, I'm not sure Tua is going to be a reliable fantasy playoff quarterback. But Tua, he's coming off of his worst game of the season. 0 touchdowns, 2 turnovers, and only 8 fantasy points. It's a game in which the Dolphins blew a 14-point lead in the final 3 minutes. Kind of looked like the Atlanta Falcons. Though Tyreek returned eventually last game. If you didn't know, Tyreek went out with an ankle injury, and he eventually returned, and this offense looked okay. But when Tyreek was out, this offense looked abysmal, and that's a scary sight because the Dolphins have a very tough fantasy football playoff schedule, and Tua is just not going to be as reliable as he's been all season. This week it starts as Tua plays the Jets defense, who have shut down great offenses in recent weeks, like the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. You guys know the crew. And then on the flip side, last week, they held the Houston offense that's been killing everybody to 6 points. Now again, Houston had some injuries. Regardless, they were held to under double-digit points. This is a Jets defense that's also given up the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. And given the tough matchup and the fact that Tyreek, even if he is active, he might not be 100% and he might not be given a full workload like normal, I would sit Tua Tagovailoa in the first round of your playoffs if you can. Luckily for me, the one that I have him in, I do have a bye week, so we'll have to see how he plays against these great defenses going forward. At the running back position, let's start off with Zeke Elliott, as he turned back the clock and did everything for this Patriot offense last week, as he had 22 carries and 68 yards on the ground, but through the air, he had 7 receptions, 70 plus yards, and a touchdown through the air. In total, I guess we want to do that, 140 or so total yards and 27 fantasy points. He was the number 1 running back last week, and it's been a while since we've been able to say that about Ezekiel Elliott, but great to see him back is a good way to put it. But with this offense desperate for answers, I think they really could rely on Ezekiel Elliott going forward, the veteran down the stretch. And in result, I think Zeke has the potential, as crazy as it might sound, to be a league-winning kind of running back. So to me, not only does he need to be on your rosters at this point, but you might actually want to start him on a weekly basis, or at least until further notice. But how about DeAndre Swift? He has had a bad month of football, no doubt about it, but I do think he can turn it around here, or at least I hope he can turn it around here. As to start, this Eagles team has been embarrassed the last 2 weeks. They've had 2 back-to-back 20-plus point losses, and again, not in great fashion. but they're hungry. And I think that, they're angry a little bit to get back on the right foot. This week they play the Seahawks, who are top 5 matchup for running backs, in favorable, right? And this is Seahawks defense that just gave up 173 rushing yards to the 49ers. Both offenses, the 49ers and the Eagles, have great offensive lines, and they both can run the football. So I think the Eagles can have similar success here against the Seattle Seahawks. And to me, given the bad month of football and given that the Eagles are desperate for answers at this point, if DeAndre Swift can't get back on track in this game, I'm scared that this offense might look to go back to Ken Gainwell to lead this backfield going forward. So I'm hoping for my fantasy teams, DeAndre Swift can use this game as the beacon of opportunity to reclaim that number 1 running back position. But then how about Ken Walker, ironically, the most talented of the 3 yet again? This one was tough because this Eagles defense has been terrible. And this is also a Monday Night Football play, which who doesn't love, especially in the playoffs, for Ken Walker to maybe save your week. However, Philadelphia still has the second best run defense in the entire league. And then to add on to it, again, Philly's been embarrassed the last 2 weeks. They're hungry and they're going to be angry in this game to get back on the right track, at least in the win column. To me, this is the perfect game for Philly to bounce back and make a statement victory. Not only do I think Philly's going to win, I think Philly's going to win big. However, if it is a close game and Seattle does manage to keep it close throughout the entirety of it, I do think it's going to have to be through the air. And of course, Philly's very susceptible to great wide receiver games as they're the number 1 matchup for fantasy wide receivers. So to me, I think Seattle's going to have to get their damage done through the air. So DK Metcalf, your JSNs, your Tyler Lockett's, they could all be starting options. And that kind of just leaves KW3 in the rear view. So to me, I would sit Kenneth Walker, especially coming off that injury as well. Let's swing over to the wide receiver position, and we're going to start with a rookie in Zay Flowers, as he's playing his best career football at the moment. And this offense as a whole is filling the void of superstar Mark Andrews. But back-to-back 20-plus point days for Zay Flowers, and he plays Jacksonville this week, who are a top 10 matchup for wide receivers. I would start Zay Flowers in a heartbeat, as this game also has the potential to be relatively high scoring, just like the Jaguars and Browns game from this last week. But 24 and 20 in back-to-back weeks, you got to think at least he can keep around that 16 to 18 mark and be a very viable fantasy option. How about Noah Brown, though? This start is very contingent, and I'll say that is contingent on CJ Stroud's status ahead of this weekend's game. So please listen to me closely. If CJ Stroud is playing, then follow through with this. I would potentially start Noah Brown this weekend. If CJ Stroud is out, do not play any Texans this weekend. Hopefully you guys can understand that. But if CJ Stroud is active, I do think, again, we talked about it on Wednesday, I do think Noah Brown could be one of those league-winning kind of guys that you throw in your flex, and he can give you that much-needed boost, as Noah Brown is the last man standing in this wide receiver room. As Tank Dell's on IR, and Nico Collins had an injury last week, he might not play this upcoming weekend. So this offense has been electric all season, we know that, and one bad week won't deter me away from starting these options in this offense. And again, the last man standing is Noah Brown, so I'm going to start him because if CJ Stroud, needs to throw the ball, his go-to guy, his number 1 option on every play is going to be Noah Brown. I can promise you it's not going to be 38-year-old Robert Woods. So Noah Brown, to me, I would start him if CJ Stroud is active this weekend. But then how about DJ Moore, a fantasy sweetheart this year? And again, I understand you're going to play him this weekend, but at least hear me out for the caution of why you shouldn't play him this weekend, as he's been great as of late, no doubt about it. 3 straight games, aside from the bye week, that he's had 20-plus point fantasy days, and he scored 2 touchdowns last week, 1 through the air and 1 on the ground. Coincidentally, it's all come when Justin Fields has returned to the field for the Chicago Bears, so DJ Moore is playing his best football as a Chicago Bear. I'll say that, not of his career, but as a Chicago Bear. But to me, at the same time, all good things come to an end. And this weekend, DJ Moore does play the Cleveland Browns, the defense that is the best against the pass and the second worst fantasy matchup for the wide receiver position. So on paper, it's not smart to start DJ Moore this weekend, as the pass rush of the Cleveland Browns, it's going to bother Justin Fields. The Bears don't have much of an offensive line. The Browns pass rush should be able to bother Justin Fields, meaning less time to throw, and less time to throw means fewer opportunities for DJ Moore to have a big fantasy day. But then Jordan Addison, we'll talk about Justin Jefferson in a moment, but simply put, this offense is struggling there in Minnesota. They put up 3 points for the entirety of last week's game. Their offense didn't even score. They don't know who their quarterback is, and until that's figured out, I really don't want any part of this offense, or at least in the wide receiver room. Of course, Ty Chandler and TJ Hawkinson are guys that you might want to start this weekend, but for me, I'm going to stay away from these wide receivers, as even when Jefferson went out last week in that game, Addison couldn't even pass 30 receiving yards for the entirety of the game. It's not the receiver's fault here, but again, I would sit Jordan Addison, and I would sit his counterpart, the thumbnail of this video, in Justin Jefferson as well. As again, I understand that, look, it's the playoffs. If Jefferson's ready to go, you want to roll with your studs. You want to roll with, at the end of the day, the number 1 overall pick in our fantasy drafts in Justin Jefferson. However, again, this offense scored 3 points last week, and in his return, Justin Jefferson, after being off for like 2 months, he suffered another injury in last week's game. So I would sit these receivers until further notice. But at the tight end position, we'll finish up here with Chig Okonkwo. And this is really just because of the gradual emergence and improvement of Will Levis on a week-to-week basis. And to me, we talked about it on Tuesday, Chigoziem Okonkwo faces Houston 2 out of the next 3 weeks. And that is a top 3 matchup for the tight end position. So not only should he be on your roster, but I would contemplate starting him for the next couple of weeks, as he's had 3 consecutive games with at least 8.5 fantasy points, and those are without touchdowns. So the volume is there for Chig Okonkwo, and to me, Will Levis is only improving, and he's kind of playing for his job going into next season. So Chig Okonkwo is going to be one of the best targets for Mr. Levis. And then finishing up here with Pat Freiermuth, and we'll make this one quick. Simply put, if Kenny Pickett was playing, I would be starting Freiermuth on a weekly basis because that is one of Pickett's guys to throw to. But that's not the case. Simply put, I just don't want to rely on Mitch Trubisky if I have another fantasy relevant option to rely on Trubisky to give me a good tight end numbers. So to me, I'm going to sit Pat Freiermuth simply for the Mitch Trubisky factor. But that's going to do it here for today's video. Again, on the road to 10,000 subs. If you liked and if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, tell a friend to tell a friend about the podcast. Each and every week, we've been giving you 2 fantasy football videos and 2 podcasts. But again, I want to re-emphasize this. If you have any questions this weekend about your lineup, please drop a comment down below. It's always good to have a second opinion. Again, we can figure it out together. What is the best option for our fantasy teams to keep our playoff hopes alive is the goal this weekend. And so if you have any questions or if you want a second opinion, drop a comment down below. But until next weekend, or until next week rather, good luck this weekend to your fantasy teams. Good luck to your real-life teams, unless you're playing the Browns. So Bears fans, I'm sorry. And then until Tuesday, stay happy, stay healthy. Good luck this week.